Ray, bonjour. Hello, everyone. Medal Wiliak, Deloise Todd Evans, the National Lead for Indigenous Exports at EDC. For the next hour, I'll be hosting what promises to be a lively discussion on building strong Indigenous business partnerships. And both sides of this partnership equation are included in our audience today. We have Indigenous business suppliers on the one hand and corporate buyers on the other. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're broadcasting to you from EDC's office in Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. But before I introduce our panelists today, I'd like to throw out a few numbers to lay the groundwork for today's discussion. $30 billion. That's how much Indigenous-owned businesses contribute to Canada's annual GDP. 5 times the growth rate. That's how fast Indigenous entrepreneurship is outpacing non-Indigenous businesses. These numbers point to a strong growth trajectory. There's no doubt about that. But when you combine this with the fact that Indigenous peoples are the fastest growing segment of Canada's population, it underscores the importance of developing meaningful partnerships that provide lasting, mutually beneficial results. So what do we say? What do we mean when we say meaningful partnerships? For starters, let's look at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the call to action, and in particular, Section 92, which deals with business and reconciliation. And that is particularly relevant to today's discussion. It calls on corporate Canada to, and I quote here, commit to meaningful consultation, building respectful relationships, and obtaining the free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous peoples before proceeding with economic development projects. In addition, it also highlights the need to ensure Indigenous peoples have equitable access to jobs, training, education opportunities in the corporate sector, and that Indigenous communities gain long-term sustainable benefits from economic development projects. And I think we can say that procurement is also implicit in this. Also important is the recently released National Indigenous Economic Strategy, which identifies more than 100 actions to support Indigenous prosperity, financial sovereignty, and economic development. Procurement is certainly an important part of that strategy, and among other goals, it urges corporate Canada to invest and build capacity in Indigenous businesses and local community economies. After all, by enhancing our ability to provide the goods and services that corporations require, we all win from the mutually beneficial economic outcomes. And with that said, let's introduce our panelists. They're incredibly experienced and credentialed, and they're eager to share their insights. First, I'd like to welcome Philip Ducharme, who's the Vice President of Entrepreneurship and Procurement at the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business, or CCAB for short. Great to see you again, Philip, and welcome to today's webinar.
Thanks, Todd. I'm glad to be here and participating with Jason and Paul.
Thanks very much. And we also have Paul Langdon with us, who's the Strategic Initiatives Officer at the Ulnaweg Development Group. Also good to see you too, Paul.
Yeah, glad to be here, Todd, and to share my thoughts on this very important topic.
And also a warm welcome to Jason Thompson, who's the co-owner of Superior Strategies. Again, Jason, always great to hear your insights.
Awesome. Todd. I'm very honored to be a part of this panel and with some great friends and colleagues. So miigwech for the opportunity.
Well, great. Well, thanks to all three of you. So rather than spend time going through their extensive resumes, I'd urge you to download the resource document in the webinar console. It includes links to their professional profiles and those of the organizations they represent. And it also includes links to information resources that we hope you'll find helpful in your quest to build businesses and those partnerships we're talking about. And keep in mind, this is an interactive webinar. So that means we want to hear from you as well. So at any point during our discussion, if you do have a question you'd like answered, send it to us through the webinar console. We saved the last 10 to 15 minutes of our program for a question and answer period. And so with that, let's get started. So Philip, why don't we start with you? Can you talk a little bit about the Certified Aboriginal Business Program, and maybe start by explaining why it's important for Indigenous companies to get certified, and what's the value to both the supplier and buyer in business equation?
Thanks, Todd. To begin with, I would like to also acknowledge that I'm joining you from the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. and now home to many other First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. In 2017, CCAB conducted a survey with our members, and 82% of the corporate respondents stated that they would find value in a certification program that could identify businesses that are majority owned and controlled by Indigenous peoples. This designation would be useful in enhancing Indigenous procurement outcomes. With this in mind, CCAB began the Certified Aboriginal Business Program, a designation that CCAB provides to Indigenous businesses that have proven they are at least 51% owned and controlled by Indigenous peoples. The certification is very important to ensure that procurement opportunities that are intended for Indigenous businesses are going to valid Indigenous-owned businesses and not businesses falsely claiming Indigenous ownership. As the Indigenous economies grow and more buying entities across the country look to be more inclusive of Indigenous businesses within their supply chains, the certification is an assurance that the business that the corporations and governments are doing business with are actual Indigenous-owned businesses. For Indigenous businesses that are certified through CCAB, the value to them is their inclusion in supply chain, CCAB's trademarked Indigenous procurement strategy, which helps them connect with buyers from the 114 corporations that have joined us with a commitment to increase procurement opportunities for Indigenous businesses.
That's great. Thanks very much. I'm just wondering if you can expand it just a little bit on sort of what's involved in the process of certification, and is there a cost to that?
Sure. In order to become a certified Aboriginal business with CCAB, you must be a member. We currently offer 2 levels of Aboriginal business membership, the Aboriginal Business Member and the Aboriginal Business Member Plus. The fees to join CCAB are based on the size of your organization. So if it's less than 20 employees, it's $350 a year. If it's over 20, it's $1,000. Once you've joined us as a member, to become certified, there are no other costs associated with it. What we do require is companies to provide us with the documentation to show the ownership and control. So for incorporated companies, we look at their articles of incorporation, we look at their share register, we look at the rights and privileges of the different share levels that are provided for the company. Then we also look at documentation to prove that the person is recognized from an Indigenous group by their First Nations, Métis, or Inuit. So it's a fairly simple process as long as you have the paperwork, and then we can provide the certification. You also get a logo to show that you're a certified Aboriginal business.
Well, that's great. Thanks very much for that. So Jason, your company has been certified by the CCAB, and so what have you seen as the benefits of that certification, and also what would your advice be to those in our audience who are thinking about certification?
Well, first of all, I also going to acknowledge that I am coming from the traditional lands of the Fort William First Nation within the Robinson Superior Treaty area, and a proud Anishinaabe man. Yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of benefits, and I truly value and respect the work that the CCA has done to help promote Indigenous business. I do own multiple businesses, 3 being CAB certified, which is a certified Aboriginal business, Superior Strategies Inc., Warrior Supplies, as well as Warrior Engineering. And ultimately, going through the little bit of work, it's a little bit of work, it's not a lot of work, but it's ultimately gratifying from my perspective as an Indigenous businesses, because it's unfortunate that we are dealing with imposters, we're dealing with fakes, we're trying to take advantage of this opportunity. And it is an opportunity, but it's definitely an opportunity that, it's probably long coming from my perspective as an Indigenous business. And, it definitely carries a lot of value in talking with, some of the larger corps that are looking to do more business with Indigenous businesses. So, I truly value it. It's important that, we've identified, I'll give you a little bit of background on my business. We're about 40 employees now. Majority are Indigenous, majority are female. And I talk inclusion every day, and it's a big part of my business. And, honestly, at the end of the day, I think, the work of inclusion is just that. It is work. It's not a donation. It's not a handout. It's work. It's hard work. And we need people who are committed to it. I gotta steal a statement from Jody Rayburn Wilson, a presentation I sat in earlier this year. She says, when you talk about inclusion, you're either all in or not in at all, because the ones who are only going part ways, you're creating more of a barrier than you are helping from the Indigenous perspective, right? So it's truly valued, and I appreciate, all the different organizations, what they're doing. And again, it's been nothing but a value and benefit for us, and the platform that the CCAB has allowed myself personally to sit on and share my voice and share my experience has been truly valued. And I believe, when I speak, I don't speak just on behalf of myself and my businesses. I speak on behalf of other Indigenous business owners that, we've gone through the struggles, we've gone through the challenges, and I want to share those so we learn, right? Because that's the whole idea, is that we're learning. We've been excluded for a long time, and it's all about learning. So big much.
That's great. Yeah, so I've been tracking, kind of following your business a little bit, and it's very impressive what you've been able to do with your wife and co-owner. So congrats on that. So Paul, over to you. Let's kind of shift gears a little bit and get you in here. From a procurement perspective, what are the benefits of partnering with Indigenous companies?
Well, first, yes, and let me acknowledge too that I'm joining in from Mi'kmaq, the traditional unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq here in Atlantic Canada. Procurement opportunities are very significant, and we have been trying to tap into them and encourage our businesses and our communities to tap into them. There are a lot of advantages of partnering with Indigenous firms and Indigenous companies to go after these. These include a ready, willing partner, the opportunities to meet the requirements of the federal supply chain. The federal government has targeted 5% procurement, but also the private sector operating in traditional areas see the opportunities to work with local Indigenous groups across Canada, whether in the resource extraction or in local areas. There's a real advantage of making strong partnerships with the Indigenous groups. There is just a multitude of real strong advantages to do so. Labor supply is one, but also building that good supply chain opportunities that would be there for a long term. So we welcome any inquiries that come forth.
That's great. I know historically a lot of corporations would look at Indigenous procurement and participation kind of as a nice to have, but now it's, we know it's a must have, right? And we need those partnerships and ownership and full participation. So Philip, we've heard about some of the issues concerning the RFP process, bidding requirements, and contract sizes in particular. From your experience, what can larger companies do to make their procurement programs more accessible to Indigenous suppliers?
There's a number of different ways companies can do this, but I think one of the most effective ways is actually engaging with the Indigenous business community, finding out what we have to offer, finding out where we would kind of fit within the supply chain, and learning what would be required to bring these Indigenous businesses to the level required for the procurement opportunities in their organization. When you look at the procurement and the RFPs, corporations, and especially the federal government, should look at the amount of work that's required to respond to the RFPs. The amount of work should be scalable to the amount of the dollar value for the contracts. Within the federal government right now, a $20,000 contract requires almost as much work as a $10 million contract. And small Indigenous businesses don't have the capacity to be able to bid on these projects. There's so much paperwork involved with that. And I think so simplifying the process, scaling it to the dollar value of the procurement is one area. Another area is sometimes unbundling the contracts. If the requirement is so big, there might not be an Indigenous business that's capable to do it. But if there's ways of taking part of that contract and stiving it off from the big contract, there'd be more opportunities for the Indigenous businesses to be able to bid on that. And again, look at some of the times if there's bid bonds that are required, how can you work with our Indigenous businesses to help them overcome that? Because again, that's another large area of issues for our businesses, especially as they grow. So I think there's a number of ways. And again, talk to the Indigenous businesses, find out what the challenges are, what they need to be able to overcome to be able to compete within these opportunities.
Thanks. That's some really good advice. So, Paul, when you look at look again at sort of a lot of these procurement issues, are there any specific protocols, Indigenous protocols, that should be followed that non-Indigenous companies should be aware of?
Well, yeah, as part of the engagement process, it's important to try to figure out where you're going and who you're going to be dealing with, what partnership arrangements you're going to be looking at. But each individual community, First Nation, have their own separate sets of protocols. Some are more traditional than others, and different tribes and different nations have different protocols. So the best advice is to go seek and make contact with the community and get good information. Good data. It's like doing a market review. If you're looking at going overseas to sell to the Japanese, you would want to know what their protocol is and how to market there. Same thing. It's market data. Go in, start a good engagement process, discuss what you want to do, see how it fits. The Indigenous partners will be very welcoming and ready to share, their information with you. So, the best advice is to get a good engagement process underway very early on, reach out to the communities that you're going to be engaged in and follow up.
That's great, Paul. I really like your analogy, comparing it to, understanding protocols in foreign markets, selling into Japan, for example. So that's important. So Jason, just wondering, we'd like to hear your take on this. I mean, you do have an incredible list of customers, and can you share any secrets beyond the strongest business relationships you have?
Well, yeah, we're very fortunate that we've grown immensely in the last little while. Honestly, I say this tongue in cheek, but COVID has definitely been a blessing for our company. I was probably 2 or 3 months out from closing my doors on the supply side of our business. And it was simply because we weren't getting an opportunity to quote, right? It was, we got added to vendors lists with no opportunity to quote. And so, the fact that we were able to demonstrate the fact that we could source products at a difficult time that others couldn't spoke volumes to who we are as a company and our resiliency, not only as Indigenous people, but as an Indigenous business, right? And I have to echo what Phil was saying. There's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of barriers out there. I deal with it all the time. Looking at different bidding platforms from Ariba to you name it, this and that. For Indigenous businesses, if you don't have access to capital, you don't have access to the experience and resources, you're eventually going to be turned away. You're going to turn away. You're just going to get frustrated with the process, right? I've always said our people are not anti-development or anti-exclusion. Please quit finding ways to exclude us. It happens. It's still happening today. We're dealing with energy projects right now where the EPC contractors are finding ways to exclude us instead of finding ways to be inclusive. And that's challenging. We as a company have made it very easy to do business with Indigenous businesses who's hiring Indigenous people. We sell office supplies. Everybody needs pens and papers, right? We sell safety supplies. We sell PPE. We sell engineering services, for Christ's sake. How easy is it, right? I'm very proud to say that our engineering company is 100% staffed by Indigenous people. Pretty simple. It's not that difficult. And it really is about, getting your head out of the sand and looking at the true value that Indigenous businesses bring to your business, to reach, to networking. I said it's oftentimes we're dealing with the stereotype of an Indigenous business is one thing until you actually get in, right? And find out who we are, our capabilities, and you'll be pleasantly surprised. So I think we got to get past the stereotype of wanting to come in and save the Indian. We don't need saviors. We need partners. We need allies. That is what we need, right? And we're growing. Like I said, your statement earlier in the numbers, we're growing. We want to be a part of these projects, right? We really do. And again, it's more so just looking at us and saying, we're an ally, we're a partner, and I think that's the beauty thing. But I think ultimately at the end of the day, I have to give kudos to Ontario Power Generation, Hydro One, especially Ontario Power Generation, the work and where they're going. I'm going to tell you, I was cautiously optimistic, but I tell you what I've seen in the last little while from one of the largest corps in Canada, the movement I've seen has been tremendous, and I applaud the efforts because this has happened in a short amount of time, and it's been exciting. And I really want to, reach out to our Indigenous business folks to sit there and go, don't lose hope. Keep pushing. A good majority of the good companies want you. Just keep pushing, right?
Yeah. So I mean, you raise a really good point there, right? So I often get questions at EDC, from some of our customers. What sectors do Indigenous companies participate in? And you can kind of see that there's some erroneous assumptions behind that. But like you say, the answer is very simple, and it's all of them. So, we have a very diverse, dynamic, and very capable, group of Indigenous businesses that we work with. So, Paul,
Yeah, can I just say one more
yep,
thing?
for sure. Yeah, definitely.
One of the
Please.
things that drives me absolutely nuts, and I hate it every time I hear it, is we'll call you when there's a project. Please don't call me when there's a project. Your businesses are operating every day. We can provide pens and papers. You need that every day, not just when there's a project. If I only brought my wife out for dinner, I've been married 26 years. If I only brought my wife out for wine or join me for dinner, I wouldn't be married 26 years. Like, come on, it's not that difficult of an assumption to say, you know what, we want to be business partners. A partnership for me is a partnership where we're looking at doing things together, not when I need you, right? That's not a partnership.
Yeah. That's great. That's a great response. So, Paul, your take on this. We know that building that greater capacity is critical in terms of taking on bigger contracts with corporations and larger corporations. So, how can Indigenous companies build those strong relationships amongst themselves, and I guess also with non-Indigenous partners, kind of help build up that capacity?
Well, yeah, there is that opportunity within certain geographic zones for individual Indigenous business to partner. I mean, you look in Saskatchewan, there's a lot of conglomerates of individual development corporations merging, and even locally here in Atlantic Canada, we see that opportunity. There are many levels of benefits for partnering from both sides, with other Indigenous companies, but also with non-Indigenous. It elevates the firm on many levels: the management capacity, it brings in the financial capacity, and certainly the market capacity. And those are three key areas that a business should be focusing on. And instead of trying to take that long pattern and trying to build it all up on your own, if there is a willing partner, if you can establish a good relationship, it is a way to get that capacity up and then be able to tap into bigger and bigger contracts and expand your thing. All businesses should be looking forward as for growth, and partnering is one way of doing it. There's just a lot of advantages, but there is a caution. Partnerships, is like anything. You got to have your due diligence, and that's a term from the 90s, but it's still there. Make sure you check things out. Make sure you know who you're getting involved with. But to the non-Indigenous businesses, working with Indigenous businesses, there's a lot of loyalty there. You establish a good partnership with an Indigenous business, they will stay with you. They will see the benefits of it. But again, partnerships are based on both partners, or all three partners or five partners coming to the table, each bringing something of value to the partnership. It may be financial capacity, it may be market capacity, it may be labor supply, but whatever it is, each partner has to recognize that they are part of the process, and it's open communication. But again, partnering does give you that advantage of elevating up to a different capacity, and there are a lot of advantages, again, with the caution of proper due diligence, making informed decisions.
Some good points there, Paul. Philip, why don't we focus on supplier diversity for a few minutes? And first off, can you describe what's meant by the term supplier diversity? And I guess more importantly, how are supplier diversity programs different from Indigenous procurement programs?
Okay, this might be a little bit of a touchy one, but there could be varying definitions of supplier diversity. But in essence, it's a business strategy that ensures diverse supplier base in the procurement of goods and services from any business or organization. So supplier diversity refers to a supply chain that incorporates businesses owned by diverse individuals or groups. Supplier diversity was actually quite common in the US. It really sort of took steam in the late 1960s. And when you look at supplier diversity in the US, there's currently approximately 16 categories that are used to identify diverse suppliers, diverse businesses, I'm sorry. But here in Canada, as constitutionally recognized and rights-bearing peoples, we as Indigenous people have to assert our rights and ensure that we're not included within these programs, because so often when Indigenous businesses are lumped into supplier diversity or social procurement, which is sort of similar to supplier diversity, we're left out. We don't have those opportunities. If you're looking at some of the corporations, you'll see they have a supplier diversity program, but they also have an Indigenous procurement program. And that's what we need to keep. We need to keep challenging businesses to ensure that they are recognizing the rights and working with Indigenous businesses. When you look at economic reconciliation, when you look at the truth and all these different commissions that have come out, Indigenous people have to be recognized. We have to be respected. If reconciliation, if we're lumped into a group that's not federally recognized or like recognized on its own, it's going to be very difficult. If you look at the federal government, they have social procurement. They also have targets for women-owned businesses, and they have the PSIB program, which again is a separate program. So supplier diversity, it's good. Like, I mean, I've worked in supplier diversity in the past, and there is strong movement for supplier diversity. But again, as an Indigenous people, we really have to ensure that we are respected and that we are recognized. So Indigenous procurement is really what has to happen to increase opportunities for our businesses.
Yeah, certainly, a little bit sensitive, but it's an important point, and it's an important issue that needs to be brought to the forefront. So sticking with you, Philip. So let's say I'm a procurement officer at a larger corporation. So how and where can I go about finding Indigenous suppliers?
Well, thanks for this question, Togs. It's a great plug for CCAB and Supply Chain, which is our trademarked Indigenous procurement strategy. Within Supply Chain, we have 114 corporations that have joined us. So we've created an Aboriginal procurement marketplace, which is currently a gated community. It's open to our certified Aboriginal businesses, as well as our Aboriginal procurement champions. So within our marketplace, each one of our certified Indigenous businesses have the capability of creating a profile on what their capabilities are, where their geographical scope, what they can do. And the reverse part of that is everyone that signs on as a champion has to supply us with a contact person for procurement or Indigenous relations within their organizations. When you're looking at trying to break into a new business for procurement opportunities, it's really difficult. Quite often you're going to go to a website and it's going to go info@abc.com. And that's where the relationship ends. There's never any more feedback. So by working with CCAB and Supply Chain, we really try and enforce that engagement so that Indigenous businesses can contact someone. And even if the corporation has nothing, it's better that the Indigenous business knows that there's no opportunity at this time, or else they've entered into a 3-year contract, so that the business isn't always going somewhere where there isn't going to be an opportunity. That being said, we do want to ensure that these businesses are looking throughout their entire supply chain when they're looking to purchase from Indigenous businesses. More than 50% of our businesses are urban-based. So if a company is only looking when they're doing a project on an area, that's not really trying to promote Indigenous procurement. We're looking at it throughout the entire supply chain, and there are businesses that can do everything. Jason, so great to have him on this call today, because he has so many different sectors and so many areas that he can supply goods and services to Indigenous businesses. So again, I think working with CCAB, and there are other organizations as well, other chambers. Paul Langdon, I mean, anyone in Atlantic Canada knows who he is, knows to reach out to him if they're looking to find Indigenous businesses. So again, work with the different associations, and again, get to know the local Indigenous business community.
That's some really good advice. And like I say, there's organizations all across Canada, economic development corporations, local chambers of commerce. So those are, and of course CCABs. Those are great places to start as well. So Paul, sort of staying on sort of this part of the discussion, can you talk about, and of course, I'm sure you appreciate the plug that Philip just put in for you. So can you talk about how the Ulnueg Development Group creates connections between Indigenous and non-Indigenous companies? And perhaps maybe take a minute or so and provide an example of what a successful relationship looks like.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Philip, for the good plug. And I am getting well known here in Atlantic Canada after moving back from Saskatchewan. But that's the effort that we put into it. We made a strategic decision to step back and say we have to build our capacity. And the only way to build the capacity is to get known in the broader non-Indigenous ecosystems. And so we reached out and participated in almost every area, but concentrating in the sectors that we've seen there was great opportunities: the ocean technology and fishing, the forestry, farming, tourism, Indigenous tourism, and making connections. And within this procurement side of things, we've been very active with ACADA, the Atlantic Canada Aerospace and Defense Association. We participate with Atlantic Provinces Economic Council. We have connections within the universities across the board. We are a core partner with COVE, the Center for Ocean Venture Entrepreneurship in Halifax. We are proactive with the Ocean Supercluster. And all of those opportunities give us a chance to go and talk to people, meet with people formally and informally, having coffee, having lunches, and just talking about it and making sure people are aware that there are Indigenous businesses that want to become engaged. And from the Indigenous business side, we encourage them to also reach out, to come to events that we host. And, with like the CCAB events, we encourage our entrepreneurs to come in and participate. We help them, get involved with the local Chamber of Commerce, the Board of Trade. We bring them to major events that are being hosted by Bank of Canada, by the Atlantic Province Economic Council, by ACADA. And so it's that with the role, my role and my portfolio strategic initiatives role is to be a connector, to get between the two sides and do a bit of managing expectations from both from the Indigenous side and the non-Indigenous side. But once you get groups talking, you can step away and they will pick it up. And if there's going to be a good relationship develop, it will develop. We're seeing that now with the uptake in the hydrogen. There's real interest there. We've had some good success of getting our businesses engaged in that. We see it all the time. And so again, it's about getting connected. Now, in Atlantic Canada, certainly I can assist, but across Canada, as Todd mentioned, there are chambers, but there's also other Aboriginal financial institutes that are sister organizations to Runaway, Saskatchewan Indian Equity Foundations, Indian Investment Corporation in Alberta. They're across Canada. Reach out to them and get a feel for who's out there. There is a welcoming group that will participate. So, I mean, it's there. Again, make the effort, go make the connection and get talking.
That's some great advice, Paul. And I should point out to the audience as well that a lot of these organizations are in our the resource document. Their links are in the resource document on the webinar console. So by all means, feel free to take advantage of that. So Philip, let's look at from the other side of the relationship. How can Indigenous companies find procurement opportunities? Are there specific things they can do? Sites, checkout, networking opportunities. I know Paul touched on some of this. I'm just wondering what your take might be on that.
Well, I think one of the first things that Indigenous companies should look at is where they actually fit in the supply chain. And look to see who would actually be the realistic businesses that they approach. So many times businesses want to get the big corporations as a client, but your business might not be a natural fit to it. So again, I think it's learning where you fit within the supply chain. A lot of the businesses that are smaller, I mean, I encourage business to business between Indigenous businesses, and you'll see that Indigenous businesses buy from Indigenous businesses. So if you're a smaller business, start looking at your local businesses. Within CCAB, again, within supply chains, we do have our Aboriginal procurement marketplace. So that's a great area to find out what opportunities might exist within your organization. There's all these different programs as well, procurement platforms. But again, as Jason was talking about earlier, that could be a barrier as well to entry, especially if there's charges that are associated. And if you want to get an RFP, you have to pay for it. Well, you can only do that so many times and not be successful before you realize that's not probably going to be the area to go into. But again, it's going out, networking. I mean, even LinkedIn, something as simple as LinkedIn, which anyone can get, is a great opportunity to find out, introduce yourself. Within the Indigenous communities, we're always, and that's one thing that I'm very proud of, and Jason is great too. We try and build each other up. So if you're talking to someone and you can't help the corporation out for an opportunity, you might know of someone. And again, so that's another way is just getting to tell everyone what you do. And then you're also going to have advocates that are trying to help you out with that opportunity. We are working with the federal government as well, the Procurement Assistance Canada. There are a number of ways to actually go into the GEDS program, which is their government employee directory service, finding out who would be the purchaser of your product or service, getting in touch with them, making that relationship. And again, everything that we work with at CCAB is trying to bring together buyers and Indigenous businesses. But Jason also said something that was really good a while ago was, just because you're an Indigenous business doesn't mean you're going to get the contract. You still have to be able to fulfill the requirements of that opportunity, and you also have to be cost competitive. So there's a lot of different things that can do, but again, it's networking, talking to people, attending events like this. I think within the chat feature, hopefully people have identified themselves and people can reach out to each other that way. And again, reach out to all three of us on this call, including yourself, Todd, would try and help or try and direct someone to an appropriate party.
By all means, that's great suggestion. A big part of the work that I do with my colleagues at EDC is making those connections. So yeah, don't anyone on the call, don't hesitate to take advantage of the services that we offer. So Paul, just we are starting to get kind of near the end, but just wondering what your advice would be to Indigenous companies. They're seeking those public and private procurement opportunities. So what would be your advice be in terms of kind of the amount of time and effort and sort of the expected return on that investment?
Well, yeah, with a good foundation and a good plan, a good process in place, there is a good return on investment for the effort put into it. But there's two streams here. Public procurement, trying to tap into the federal government, is a completely different animal than dealing with private sector. Typically, private sector likes to operate at the speed of business, will make decisions very quickly. Their managers, their project managers have some autonomy just to make a decision and get it done. And most major projects coming into Atlantic Canada now see that they want to participate and they want to be engaged with the Indigenous space, and so that they come in well prepared. If they're not prepared, we assist them in trying to get a feel for it, introduce them to some key entrepreneurs, and we've seen the results of that, so that contracts have been awarded almost in 24 hours. Now, if you go after the federal government supply chain, it will take more than 24 hours. But in the long run, it may be, the benefits may still be there. But I guess there is significant benefits for the entrepreneur who wants to go after it. If you want to reach out and look at it, if you mix the two, the federal government now in their supply chain requirements, especially in the defense sector, there's multiple benefits for private sectors to engage with Indigenous businesses, and they get a multiplier effect for their industrial trade benefits programs. And so if you can get tapped into that, there's some real advantage. Again, it's private sector doing it. They know that they'll get value for their investment. So there are good opportunities. Again, you got to be prepared for it. Don't expect it's going to happen overnight. But if you can deliver the product, you can deliver the service, there will be a willing buyer out there.
That's great. So Jason, picking up on what Paul just said, can you provide tips on identifying those kinds of strategic relationships, and then how to go about setting up introductions and building out those relationships?
I think it's definitely been a lot of hard work. I'll have to touch on again what Phil mentioned earlier about paying a premium. I think there's this stereotype out there that any business doing business with an Indigenous company or sourcing products or whatever is going to pay a premium, and that's not entirely fair, and it shouldn't be right. I couldn't afford to run a business paying a premium for every service I'm buying from whoever the suppliers. That's not right. But we've been facing challenges, I'll tell you, as a supplier, as an Indigenous supplier, and unfortunately, I'm very few, and I'm sure I'm a few of many to come, Indigenous businesses, but getting fair pricing, the same pricing the big players would get, so that we can be competitive, right? I want to be competitive. Trust me, I want to be competitive because I want your project to succeed. but that's a challenge, right? I'm not getting the same pricing that some of the big players are getting. And already when price is king or price is queen or whatever you want to call it, we're on the outside looking in. And then when companies are going direct to manufacturing, in case you haven't, been made aware, we don't have a lot of manufacturing on our First Nations, so we're not manufacturing a lot of products. So again, we're excluded. It's about finding eliminating the barriers that are causing us challenges. And I was talking to a lot of our, or some of our bigger customers, and they're asking me for feedback relative to how can we improve things. Please go to your suppliers, go to the 3Ms of the world, the big manufacturers, and say, give Indigenous business some preferred pricing so that we can be competitive, so we can employ more people, right? I'm talking to one of my customers right now. I'm saying, you know what, they want me to open up a warehouse down in Southern Ontario in the GTA. And my goal, honestly, is to build a warehouse on a First Nation somewhere, build that warehouse, create jobs. I don't know how many other businesses are proposing that concept, right? That's what concept, because I understand every one of our communities at a different place in their healing journey, right? There's been a lot of atrocities to our people. They're all different places, and some are very welcoming, some are still, battling with the effects of residential schools and that sort of thing. But I'm all about, respecting traditional territory, but I'm all about bringing our people along, right? I'll bring them along every day of the week. And that's just the passion I have. And it's important, right? And it's important to tell our story, to sit there and say, you know what? I don't want to be excluded anymore. We don't want to live in poverty. Our kids don't want to grow up in poverty. We've experienced that. We've all been there. I said, I'm still a kid from the res. I'll always be the kid from the res, I said, and I can handle myself in the trap line. I can handle myself in the boardroom. But the important part is that it has to be a fair playing field. And we don't want to be having to go to customers saying, well, you're paying a premium for this because you're dealing with Indigenous business. I don't feel comfortable doing that. I don't think a lot of our businesses do, right? But you're seeing a lot more of us out there, and it's folks like the CCAB and the work that Paul's doing to sit there and educate people, right? I also got to mention that, I am the incoming chair of the board for the Thunder Bay Chamber of Commerce. I'm a founding member of the Anishinaabe Business Professional Association. So we really also have to get involved. We have to put our skates on and get in the game, right? I can sit there and yell and scream at the TV to try to change a call. Hasn't worked yet. Been doing it for years for the Leafs, but we have to get involved, right? We have to get involved. We have to put our skates on. We have to get out there, right? And it's important. But like I said, we want allies. I need allies. We all need allies, right? I want people to help me learn. I'm still learning every day of the week. I love it. I love it. I got a lot of passion for this stuff, and I want to work with great people. So I hope I answered your question, Todd.
No, that's great. It's like what Philip was saying too, right? About, kind of the communities building each other up and seeking those partnerships. And, sort of my role as, at EDC is also trying to support that as well. And I guess one other point too, one of these days I'm going to have to come up north with you, and we'll go out moose hunting on the land somewhere. So just one final question, and I'm going to give this one to you as well, Jason. I'm just looking at the questions coming in. A lot of great questions. I don't think we'll get to all of them. But when you look at pursuing opportunities outside of Canada, so I understand you're looking to expand some of your business lines into the U.S. Can you talk just maybe a minute or two on that experience?
Oh, is that for me? Sorry.
Yeah, that's for you.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, no, definitely. No, we're definitely all about looking at the U.S. market, looking at opportunities. Let's face it. We do have an opportunity as Indigenous people to take advantage of the U.S. opportunities, right? Looking at foreign free trade zones, utilizing the old Jay Treaty. Apparently, talking with my friend and colleague Patty Haidu, that there's some opportunities out there. Legislation has been changed to make it easier for Indigenous businesses to do business in the U.S. Working with companies, some great companies that are doing work over in Europe and Asia and that sort of thing, right? Having that conversation, using the ESG conversation to actually, discuss the social responsibility part of ESG, which is also very important. And talking with some of the chiefs that we've been dealing with, right? The environment's important. Don't get me wrong. We're seeing the effects of climate change in our community, especially in the far north. It's having a devastating effect on supply chain and et cetera. But social responsibility is also a big part of ESG. And that's an opportunity for businesses to really look at Indigenous inclusion and the social responsibility side of it, to say, hey, let's do business, right? And I think, right across, especially the continent here in Canada and US, we're seeing a great, there's a lot of work around inclusion. The U.S. federal government and their spend on diverse groups and Indigenous groups is huge, huge opportunity, right? So again, it's inspire more people to get involved. Let's get involved, get involved. And I coined the term business. We got to get business oriented here and getting out there and take advantage of these opportunities, right? That's what I have on my license plate on my car. It's called business. We go businessing every day.
That's great. Yeah, so I think that's we're going to start looking at some of the questions there. Somebody made a great comment here, not so much a question, but kind of suggesting that within each sector, there seems to be kind of those larger corporate champions that have great procurement programs, and they call out like Suncor and Nutri and saying how do you kind of leverage those? How can other sort of companies in that same field, look to them or partner with them or learn from them, right? In terms of how they've brought about their sort of those successful procurement examples. So I think that was a great comment. So there's a good question here that I've heard mostly references to large corporations and big projects. Is there any place for a small a non-Indigenous company, plus or minus 15 million in revenue, to attract interest from an Indigenous partner? And they're talking in this case in the seafood industry, but I think that would be a great question for any industry. I don't know, maybe if I can maybe throw that one to you, Philip. Is there anything that how a small company can kind of support that Indigenous procurement?
Absolutely. It doesn't matter what size of the company is, they're always going to be buying goods or services. So there's Indigenous businesses in every sector. As Jason was talking about, if you want to buy pens, I mean, everyone needs to buy pens or office supplies. There are Indigenous businesses that can do that. And our Indigenous businesses, again, are looking to see what is going to be the fit for them. So that could be a sweet spot, doing small contracts. I mean, and they can build it up and grow their company. One of the things that when you were talking about that comment was they were talking about Suncor. Suncor was actually probably the leader in Indigenous procurement, but they looked at the businesses, and Jason also alluded to price. If you're going to base everything on price, it's going to be very hard for Indigenous businesses to get anywhere. But if you look at the price, Suncor took a chance on a business. It was higher at the time when they brought the business on, but they were able to grow that business so that they had the buying power, that they could be competitive, and now they're a prime vendor to these corporations. So there's a lot of different things that these corporations of any size, and again, like a $15 million revenue company, if you're going to buy something, so you can utilize an Indigenous business. I mean, if you need any marketing materials, if you need anyone for your website to do website creation, there's Indigenous businesses. Just reach out to any of us. I do want to take this opportunity, Todd. It's completely off topic, but I did want to give congratulations to Tabitha Bull, our CEO. Today, she was actually awarded the Ontario Chamber of Commerce CEO of the Year for 2022. So I think it's a testament to the incredible work she does. And it's just an absolute privilege to work with her. And I think it's reflected on how the staff works with the rest of the companies or country as well. So that's offside, but I really want to acknowledge her.
That's awesome, and that's great news. And as you know, we have at EDC, we have a good working relationship with CCAB, and CCAB and the work that Tabitha has been doing has been very important in helping EDC, as a federal crown corporation, move up that learning curve. So it's big kudos to Tabitha on that. There's another question there. I think we may have covered on a little bit, but I'm hoping we can kind of expand on it. And so maybe I'll start with you on this, Jason, because I know we've talked about this before. It talks about the challenges or obstacles that you've experienced when bidding on public and private contracts. And I know, Jason, you've kind of talked about sometimes when you go and you're bidding on a contract or responding to an RFP at a large corporation, that extra layer of complexity comes with working through their Indigenous procurement department. Just wondering if you can maybe talk about your experience around that and some of those challenges and any suggestions to overcome them.
Yeah, it's been challenging, to be completely honest with you. It's not all every occasion. It's unfortunately it's in most occasions where corporations put in this Indigenous relations component to it. But, and I equate it using this type of analogy, right? It's like, we're all running this marathon. If you're in a business, you're running this marathon. All of a sudden, you've identified yourself as an Indigenous business, and all of a sudden you got a detour within this marathon. And not only am I running a 10-mile road race, I'm now running a 10.25-mile road race, so I got to go this way. And, when you don't give the Indigenous relations team the opportunity to issue contracts or purchase orders, it's just another layer. Unfortunately, it's another layer that we have to go through, right? And, at the end of the day, it does become a lot more challenging in that regard, right? And, I'm always of the premise of what gets measured gets done. If you ain't measuring it, it probably ain't getting done, right? And it's unfortunate, but that's the reality of things. Like I've always said, people make New Year's resolutions. If it doesn't happen, I'm going to lose 20 pounds this year if I don't do it. It's like, oh, well, I'll try again. Better luck next year. There's got to be consequences to not hitting your targets, and it has to be measured, right? Because again, it becomes a promise that's unfulfilled. I've been in situations where I've called out companies because they put in these big procurement targets relative to Indigenous inclusion, hiring of Indigenous people. They don't meet it. I call them out, and I'm the bad guy. I never made the promise. I never sit there and said I was going to do this, do that. Then all of a sudden, I'm the bad guy because I held you accountable, right? That's wrong. It's so wrong. All I'm doing is like, I want to see your project succeed, but don't sit there and promote a project based on Indigenous inclusion and market to the government, because I don't know how many proposals I've seen where always there's an Indigenous factor to it, so that it looks great on the proposal. But if you're going to write it, do it. If you're going to say it, do it. Simple, right? It's not that hard. At least try to do it. At least try it. Try something, right? But it is that whole process, right? Where, try to make things simpler. Like even the provincial government, I hate to beat up on the government, but I will. Our provincial government in Ontario doesn't even have an Indigenous procurement strategy. They have nothing. They have nothing. If I can answer you the question on small businesses, I think small businesses and Indigenous businesses have a lot more in common than the big businesses. I think ultimately it's all about relationship building and working together, right? So don't let that deter you. Please get out, join the different organizations. Hopefully we get more Indigenous businesses involved in the Chamber of Commerce, because I believe it's a great network. And I kudos to Tabitha. She's doing a fantastic job, and good to see our lady succeeding. So kudos, awesome.
That's great, Jason. Thanks for that. So, Paul, we're getting some very specific questions there, industry focused around maritime technology, maritime industries, and seafood, and people asking about kind of where can they go to find support or find suppliers, partners within those sectors. Given your experience, not just in Atlantic Canada, but certainly across Canada, is there anything specific that you can provide in terms of advice for that?
Well, if they are, the first chap on talking about seafood industry, a small company involved in seafood, we've had discussions with small non-Indigenous firms that wanted to partner with Indigenous firms, and there's mutual benefits to both being engaged. And for anybody who's coming into Atlantic Canada and want to get involved in the Indigenous sector, certainly reach out to myself, reach out to any one of the development corporations. They're not hard to find. We can certainly give them a list, but we do have the presence here. We would be quite willing to sit down and chat, but on a national basis is the same thing. If you can't find anybody, CCAB has a great contact list. The other Aboriginal financial institutes across Canada have contacts, but reach out to me. We'll try and line you up across the country. Todd, your office too has lots of good contacts. I guess the big thing here is just to reach out, start the conversation, start discussing what it is, where you want to go. And again, private sector organization, fisheries association, seafood industry, tourism associations, that all have their own way of making that connection. And in Atlantic Canada, we deal with most of them. So it's there. I guess it's a matter of just reaching out.
That's great. Here's a simple question for you, Philip, and it's: is the CCAB Indigenous-owned business certification recognized by the federal government?
Right now, the government has their own directory. It's called the Indigenous Business Directory. But one of the first RFPs that came out after COVID, it was for masks. And within that one, they did say if they were within the Indigenous directory or else if they were certified with CCAB. So we do work quite closely with the federal government. And we are looking to try and do that. I mean, there's a group of companies that are looking to almost bring together a list, almost in working in conjunction with the federal government, that again is sort of led by the Indigenous peoples, as opposed to what the federal government does. So they do recognize our programs, but then we also get them into the Indigenous Service Directory. But I think we are working that if they are certified, but not just through us. I mean, if you look through ISC and through the PSIB program, if there is a modern treaty agreement, it could be in there, and they identify the businesses. So there's different avenues that the federal government recognizes for Indigenous businesses.
That's great. Thanks. Thanks very much. And there's a good question that kind of looks at opportunities outside of Canada. And it's as a Canadian company having branch offices in West Africa, we are wondering if we can represent Indigenous suppliers in West African markets. Before I turn it over to comments from the panel, I mean, that's something what we do at EDC, right? We try to find those opportunities, make those connections, and oftentimes we'll work with a large corporation, a large partner who has an established supply chain in Canada, but that company is also bidding on contracts outside of Canada. So there's definitely an opportunity to bring those Indigenous suppliers in Canada into that foreign supply chain. So open it up to any of our speakers if there's any comments on that. If not, there's lots of questions still coming in.
I'll take that one, Todd. I'm definitely.
Yeah, sure, definitely.
We've created this warrior brand here. We've got our own line of workwear, apparel. We've got you name it, and it's growing actually. And I got to share with you though, the warrior from the Indigenous perspective is not the aggressor; it's actually the helper, protector, and that's important for us, right? This brand is important for us. The 4 colors of the medicine wheel are about being inclusive. And we are an inclusive people. When the first settlers arrived on our shore, we welcomed. And that's a big part of who we are, right? So I'm open. Anybody on this call that wants to talk, reach out and talk partnerships. I'm happy to do that. We are getting swamped with opportunities, but I'll do my best to reach out and reply. But I think that's what it's all about, right? It's about doing things together and building capacity and we want to expand. We want to grow this warrior brand 100%, right? So I'm always open.
So I'm looking at the time. Maybe we will have one final question here. And the question is there a designation of origin for food products made by entrepreneurs from Indigenous and First Nations? So that's something we see quite often, right? Is having that kind of sort of Indigenous branding. And this is a great question, but I think it applies to other sectors as well. So I'm wondering if Paul or Philip, if you might just want to spend a minute on that. I'm looking at time, maybe 30 seconds or so, and sort of in terms of being able to kind of leverage that branding.
Yeah, from our perspective, we have worked with a couple of First Nations here who are looking at marketing their products internationally. They are trying to establish and come up with a good brand name to identify it as an Indigenous company, an Indigenous product, and with that, it's an important step going forward, as it is in any business decision. When you're branding your product, you want to make sure that you take in the community culture of it and present that internationally. There is, as we've always heard, there's a real positive reception in the international marketplace for Indigenous products. But saying that and getting there is a challenge, but it's one that can be done. But I know that Philip and his firms also would be dealing with the same challenge.
Yes, and I think that is something that we can definitely explore. When you're looking, I mean, in the past, there was Indigenous art that was produced, and there was a certification body for that here in Canada that was Canadian made, Indigenous made. And again, as we look at the growth of the Indigenous businesses and we see how many are doing in food products and things like that, that is something that probably is going to get brought
Mhm.
forward, because again, as Indigenous business, we want to show the pride in our products, and we want people to know that they are bona fide Indigenous products. So I think that's something that we can look at. And I mean, we have a great research team. We got some great capabilities in that. So I think that is something that would be very important. And I think people want to do, just like the certification, they want to ensure that it's an Indigenous product, it's an Indigenous produced. So that is something that definitely I'm sure is in the works. And if not, it will be soon.
That's great. So I guess we're pretty much at time. Or there are a lot of questions here around identifying sources for finding partners, different directories and other sources of information. Again, I'd encourage everyone to go into the resource document. A lot of those resources are identified there. But at the end of the day, by all means, please feel free to reach out to any of us on this call. I hope my colleagues don't get too upset with that one, because I know we're all pretty busy people. So that's it. That's all the time we have for today. And so I really hope you enjoyed our discussion as much as I did. And my thanks again to our incredible panelists and to the audience. We will be sending out a survey tomorrow morning asking for your feedback on this program. If you do have time to respond, we'd love to hear from you. We're always looking for ways that we can improve. And I'd also like to let you know that our next webinar will deal with how women-led companies can find international buyers, and that'll be broadcast on November 17th. So I hope you will join us for that. In the meantime, if you do have any questions, you can give EDC a call at 1-800-229-0575 to speak with one of our trade advisors, or you can always visit us at edc.ca. So until next time, enjoy the rest of your day. Namoltas. Thank you. Merci. Nagormig. Walaliak. Miigwech.